The question and concept we are discussing in this tutorial is iterables and iterators. There will be three relative questions to this JavaScript language category question. The iterator concept is newly introduced in ES6. It's a kind of new mechanism to iterate or traverse through data structures. As you know, array is already iterable. It means if you want to put a for-off loop on an array, then you can easily do that. For example, I create an array called ARR and let me also put few values in it. I just put a for loop. Let maybe one variable I of ARR and we say console log the value of I. If I run this, then we get the output. Similarly, strings, maps, sets, all these data collections are iterable. But imagine that you have an object literal like this. Now you want to use for-off loop on this object. In short, you want to make this object literal an iterable object. You can do that in ES6 using symbol.iterator. And we are going to implement, or rather convert, an object literal into an iterable object as well. But before we do that, I'm going to explain step by step syntax of the symbol.iterator. We will just see the basic syntax of the symbol.iterator with easier way, that is the array. Let's take the same code of an array and iterate through using symbol.iterator. Let's try that. So here I'm going to say itr. The reason I'm taking an object itr because the array should have a key called symbol.iterator which returns the iterable object. So this is a kind of method you are calling with key symbol.iterator and that returns the iterable object in itr. Let's try to display the value of itr. As we go on, you will have a clear idea what exactly am I doing here. Let me save this and run the code. As you can see, the value of itr says that it is an array iterator. Now the next thing is that itr object will automatically have a next method which will iterate through every element one by one. So I can either say itr.next, whatever it returns I can store it in a variable and we display it, or we can straight away display as well as we move to the next element as well. So now if I run this, it will start moving. So now if you see this, that itr's value is this, that is object array iterator. The next is value and done. The value is 4, which is the 0th element of array. Done is the status that it is not yet done, that is the iteration is not over. If I write this statement 4 times, let me write it 5 times in fact. 1, 2 and 5. I'll remove this itr now. Again we run to see what happens. See this. We have the value 4, 5, 6, 7. The last value is undefined. Every time done says false, but the last iterator returns this object itself. The iterator returns this object which has value and the next iteration status. So here we have true, that means now it is done. So now we have used the symbol.iterator to iterate through array, though our purpose is to iterate through object literal as well. I mean iterating through something which is not iterable. So let's start doing that as well. Imagine that you have an object like this. Here you have two values. Let's say start, which has, for example, whatever value it is, and you also have the end, which again has, let's say, 15. So now we want to iterate through not the properties, that is start, end and so on. We want to iterate through 10 to 15. Now when I say iterate, it literally means that you should be able to have a for loop like this for I of obj. Now this is not possible. We want that every time this loop is executed, the obj is executed, there has to be a value 10, 11, 12 and so on. And it should go till the end of this value. Let me just put a console. Also later on it will give you the output, not at the moment. At the moment, if I try to run this, certainly it will give me an error saying that obj is not iterable, right? It is not the iterable object. So I cannot have for of with obj. And that's what we are going to do. How? Let's see the rules first of all. When you want to make an object iterable, it should have method whose key is symbol.iterator. That means I am supposed to put a method inside obj. At the moment I am defining the method separately. So I will say obj symbol.iterator. I'm adding a function to it. Now as I said, the object should have symbol.iterator method, and that should return an iterable object. That should also have the next method as well. So these are the rules you need to follow. So first thing, I'm going to create an iterable object. So I'll say itr in it, and this I'm going to return from this method. So I'll say return itr. Now this iterable object should have a next method. So I'm going to put a next method. It has to be next like this only. Inside this, what I want is that if the obj dot start is less than equal to obj dot end, then it should return, as you saw in the array also, we return the value which is going to be every time I'm going to increment the start value. So I'll say plus plus, though I am taking the same variable, I should take a separate variable, but that's fine at the moment. And done is equal to false. Else at the end, what we want is, we do not want to return a value. We just want to say done is true. That's it. Now let's try to run and see whether our object is iterable or not. Let me remind you that we have kept a for loop where we are putting for of on obj. So let's run this. There it is. So now we have the value 10 to 15 right here. So the condition here is you put a method inside the object which returns an iterable object, like here we have done this. This, if we want to simplify, then you can remove this return statement from this place. Now instead of this, if you just say return here, this should also work, right? Because there is no difference as such in writing like this. So now if I just run, the output should be the same. So we have this output, the code is still running here. Not only that, I have intentionally kept the function outside the object, but we can just cut this function, the entire function, which is actually a method of obj, and I can put it in. The only difference will be we cannot have the colon sign, we cannot have the equal to sign, so we'll put a colon, or we can go with the ES6 syntax like this. This is also fine. And we do not need any obj because we are inside the obj itself. So now if you observe this, it is still going to be the same output. In this code, the object obj does not have the next method. What I mean to say is that the next method is actually a method placed inside the symbol.iterator method. You also can place the next method as a part of the obj like this. Say for example, you are not going to return anything at the moment, and this next method I'm going to cut from this. This is not needed at the moment. Let's say this is the end of symbol.iterator method. So I'll bring the bracket here. the comma I am going to add, that this is now the next method of obj itself. Earlier this next was part of symbol.iterator. Now I am keeping next as part of obj only. Now the only thing is, when you write the symbol.iterator, you must return the object itself, right? Because there won't be any reference otherwise. Now if I run, still we get the output. So this is even a better way of writing code, though this has a limitation. And the limitation is that this way is only possible when iterator and iterable are the same object. Also, if there are two or more for of running simultaneously, then this will not work, because see, this symbol.iterator and next, they both are placed inside obj. So there will not be, and it is returning the object itself. So earlier this wasn't the case. Earlier it was returning the iterator separately, but now they both are, that is iterator and iterable are the same object. So there cannot be two or more for of running simultaneously. But actually that is also a very rare case. So there is no harm in using this syntax. Let's discuss relative questions of this topic. The first question is, what is the purpose of iterator? The use of an iterator is to make a data structure iterable, which is not. Arrays, strings, maps or sets or other similar collections are already iterable. But when you create an object which should have facility of putting for of loop on it, then you need to create the iterator. The second question is, how do you create an iterator? The symbol.iterator method must be implemented, which should return an iterator object and should also have a next method which returns the object like this, where you have the value and the done status, or maybe the done status only like this when the iteration needs to end. Third question is, explain a practical use of an iterator. Well, the use of an iterator is not very prompt when you use it in the same scope, like we have done, that obj is also there, the for loop is also there, so it is in the same scope. But let's say you have your own data structure which is used by other programmers, then the real charm comes into picture, as the custom data structure which you have created needs to have a provision of for of, that is kind of loop. Then if your object is not iterable, then it will not work. So you are in a way creating a pointer to move in the data structure which you have provided to the end user, who is actually a programmer.